Let's make a blurred background. And why do we want to make a blurred background? Welcome to another episode of Better Images here with JP on Websites for Beginners, and we are talking about blurred backgrounds. Well, before I talk about how we're going to do it, just a quick note that actually some editors out there and page builders include a function to apply blur to the images. So that is something that some have natively within them, but most don't. So you will tell me, I don't want a blurred image. I'm looking for a pristine, sharp image for my site. But there are cases where blurred images are actually very functional. I'm going to talk about three. Let's look at this one here that is slightly blurred. Not much, but slightly. It gives a dreamy, mystical feeling. And exactly what do you see here? A wedding. So that kind of image we will use for weddings. We will use things for baby photography or baby images, something to soften it a little bit. So if you have a daycare center or you do babysitting work, maybe if you have a hero image like this with text over it, you want to blur the background a little bit slightly, give it that nice welcoming feeling and not so strong on the eyes. Of course, what blur also does, it provides contrast, because when you blur the image in the background and you put text over it, there is more contrast so you can read the text better. So there's two aspects to this. So number one, it's things like weddings and babies and stuff like that. You just apply a slight blur, make it a little bit dreamy. The other one is this case. This is extreme blur. And you will say, oh, okay. Again, one is to provide that contrast. And in fact, this image has a blur applied, I'm pretty sure, as well as an overlay. You must see there's no real white in this image. Everything is a little bit shaded. So you've got two things here. And again, with that, it provides you with this contrast, easy to read. But here comes the second but for this image. Often when you are doing sites for companies, their offices aren't the best and those beautiful, pristine offices that you see on most websites. In fact, if you start and look at this picture carefully, you will see that's probably a microwave over there next to your photocopier. There's a box here, there's a box there, there's a box here. This is your standard messy, well, not messy, it's standard office. As a hero image, it's not going to look that impressive. But applying a blur over it, you cover that up, you still give the office there. Any person who works in this company will identify, hey, this is my company, and they'll still be happy. They won't think, why did you blur it? For them, it's like, oh, look at this very artistic effect. So this is the second place where you would want to blur it. And again, the function that we get is the contrast. You can put your text, your button over it, and it pops out. The third one that I've seen a lot, I didn't get an example of it immediately here, but we will work with an example like that, is places that are sensitive. And we talk about hospitals and clinics. If you are doing a site for a clinic and a hospital, you often do not want to portray the things in there. There may be a person walking through there with an IV drip on them, and you don't want that person to be in the image. Blurring it takes out all that legal ramifications that may come with it. It gives context. People can see it's a hospital or a clinic or a center, and they don't see all the finer details. That is why if you go to stock sites and you look for something like a hospital, you will often find they're blurred, because no person walking into a hospital can just take photos there and put it on a stock site. So they blur it. That is why you find many of them blurred. So three situations. One, to make it a little bit dreamy. Two, if your image isn't that great. It's not that great, but it gives context. Then you blur it. You can still see it's an office. And three, when the contents is sensitive. Let's go get a sensitive one at pixabay.com. Pixabay.com. And Pixabay, just like Unsplash, free images for you to use. And I found a hospital corridor here. So we type in hospital corridor. Hospital corridor. And I am going to choose this one over here. Right, so we click on this hospital corridor and click on free download. I'm not logged in, and I'm just going to keep it with this one, 1920. I don't need larger than that. And download. And they want me to sign up, but I'm just going to say I'm not a robot. in this metaphysical sense. I am not. And we download the image. And let's then go into our photo editor, in this case, TOPAZ Studio 2. You can see the link in the description below. But I just want to say, when it comes to blur, applying a blur, every photo editor on the market can do that. So you're going to find it in things like Luminar, you're going to find it in Photolab, Photoshop, Affinity Photo, Capture One Pro. I'm not sure about Capture One Pro, but you're going to find it in all of them on one RAW as well. Let's go get our image. We download it over here and drag and drop it into TOPAZ Studio 2. All I'm going to show you is how to apply the blur. We are not going to do any other editing apart from that. Go to a filter, effect, a preset. It doesn't matter what it means. They all do the same. And we click on add filter. And then you see they've got categories over here. This one is essential, creative, stylistic, and plugins. So I think it's under creative and you see blur over here. So click on blur and nothing happens because you have to set the settings. In TOPAZ Studio 2, you get two kinds of blurs. And let's complicate things and make it more than one, right? The one that we will mostly use for a normal blur, the way you envision a blur, is called Gaussian Blur. I think I pronounced it correctly, Gaussian Blur. G-A-U-S-S-I-A-N. And if you work with programs like Adobe Premiere Pro, all of them, you will find the Gaussian Blur in there. All you do is you start applying the amount. So with this slider, click and drag to the right, and you will see it blurs out. Now, here comes the trick. You need to blur it so that the image can still be interpreted for what it is, in this case, a hospital. But at the same time, also obscure which hospital it is. So in this case, for sensitivity, if I drag it all the way to the right, come on, what is that, right? Over here, too much, and around here. I think this is just good enough. Anyone can figure out this is a hallway. There are chairs outside the doors, and you get the feeling this is a hospital when you look at those doors at the bottom. It could have been a school maybe, but it's very clean, very clinical, so you get that feeling it is a hospital. If, again, on the other hand, you take it too low, then no need to even apply a blur at this stage. It's not worth it. So let's put it there where we think it's okay, over here. And in TOPAZ Studio 2, when you hover over it and you click, it will show you the original. That's the original. This is after, original, and after. Let's look at the other one while we are here, called diffusion. Now, diffusion is not going to work on the hospital. When I click on diffusion, okay, it's resetting everything. And then you have strength. So let's apply the strength. And you see it doesn't blur like the previous one. It's starting to look very hazy, very dreamlike. And then there's another slider over here, softness. Ooh la la, making everything as soft. And then you can still apply blur. Right, this is very dreamy. So in this case, we are now talking about those photos that I mentioned earlier, which are for weddings and for babies, engagements, those things where you want to apply kind of a romantic effect. Let's do that. I have opened in On One RAW this image of my cousin's wedding we attended this year in May, and I took some photos there. But let's use this image. Let me just go quickly and grab it. I want to get a JPEG. Let's grab this JPEG and we take it into TOPAZ Studio. Right. So now let's apply that blur filter again. Blur. And we choose diffusion. Let's just work on the strength first. And you will start to see it's starting to look silky, smoothie. And then we can add some more softness. It's just getting more and more dreamlike. And then you can add even some more blur. Right. That is what the diffusion does over here. Right, so you can see the blur. We have the Gaussian blur that's going to apply the blur as you know it, which is not going to work for the wedding. Definitely not for the wedding, but it's going to work for things like offices and for your clinics and hospitals. And when you come to babies, weddings, engagements, you're going to use something like this one, which is called diffusion. On One RAW, let's just have a look again at that image over here, so I can show you a little bit of a different kind of blur that we can apply over here. We go into their edit and effects, and you know all of these editors more or less do the same thing. Add filter, and then over here you see the option for blur, and I'm going to apply a blur. And it comes in with various blurs already. Again, you see the type here is called Gaussian Blur already. The amount is applied, and we've learned that Gaussian Blur is going to give you that standard blur that you expect when you hear the word blur. Then they have other options here. They've got a motion. Now, motion is going to create the effect like somebody was shaking you like crazy while you were taking this photo. And there's a lot of interesting effects and creative effects that you can create with this as well. And this is going to be very cool if you have something like maybe a sports scene with an athlete running or somebody doing something in a gym, and you apply this, it gives that essence of motion. Then you have radial blur. And with radial blur, you can actually have a center point here. So I'm going to grab the center point and put it on her. And then you have that kind of effect. And I think the amount, right? And then you have smoothing. You can clear that out. Interesting, right? And then surface blur. Now, surface blur is, it's a smoothing effect almost. You can see it's becoming to look a little bit cartoon-like. And there we have some extra blur. Let's reduce this. Okay, and that's surface. And then last one is a box blur. Now, box blur is almost like pixelated. Just going to increase the amount, and you will see it begins to look a little bit pixelated. I think we've had enough blur experiences at this moment, but you have learned that blurred images have a purpose when it comes to website making, and that you should actually sometimes sit back and think of how you can do it. It creates a lot of context. Often when you are working with offices and small concerns, even big companies, people there do not want to appear in the photo. And you get a photographer to go there or yourself and you take the photo, you will always find somebody peeking over the cubicle, ruining the photo, or everyone hiding away. They do not want to appear in the photo. And that's when you just grab out your cell phone that is not so obvious and you snap silently away with your cell phone. Of course, the quality may not be that good, but with today's cell phones, man, some of them exceed some of the best cameras on the market. You can easily make this kind of image, bring it into TOPAZ Studio 2 or the photo editor of your choice, apply that blur there, bring it into your page, and then you just apply maybe another overlay, like this one has got a shade of black maybe applied here, a tint for it, and then you have a very good contrast with the back. See you in the next episode of Better Images.